Yesterday, I saw the report that there's been a fourth suicide among the cops who were at the January 6th coup, the very serious attempt to take over the United States government by some guys wearing coonskin caps, shirtless, carrying podiums away. And the news explanation for this was that these cops, 4 suicides from among the cops that were involved that day. They were just so traumatized by the coonskin cap guy that they decided to take their own lives. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, my impression is they've been hailed as heroes by the media ever since it happened. Does anyone, is this suspicious? I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't even follow the news regularly. I don't understand. But that seems weird to me. So I was thinking we need to have an episode on a very famous idea by a very famous thinker. And I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but it seemed like I must do it now, So the thinker obviously is Confucius, who, by the way, is a almost exact contemporary of Heraclitus. It's really interesting that these, genius thinkers of the truth, so to speak, sort of showed up right around the exact same time, thousands of miles and continents apart from one another. In Confucius, there is this famous idea called the rectification of names. So, as you know, if I remember right, there was the kind of classical empire, or I don't know if it was an empire or like a civilization that preceded the age that Confucius lived in, was called the Chu or the Zhou Empire, or dynasty. I think they called them dynasties, right? And this would be like the equivalent of where's my Plutarch? Whoever it was, the kind of, who was that? I did that episode on Lycurgus, almost exactly corresponding to these kind of semi-mythic, very early lawgiver types. Solon of Athens would be another one. Or probably Solomon among the Israelites in the Old Testament. So you've got were they even really historical figures? Who knows? This is really, really deep history. Well, Confucius, it turns out, was a man of great, great learning. He was always recommending that we go back and read the classics, basically. And so, in some sense, I'm not claiming to be a Confucius, but I am claiming to have heard the message here, and I'm trying to participate in the same kind of, call back to all that was good before, so that we don't forget. And so one of the things that he does is he says that this Zhou dynasty that went before him, I forget the names of the dynastic leaders or whatever, but that he says they did it right. They did it in this very passive, they were not an active bunch. In fact, the image almost seems to be that they sat around on their thrones just nobly, doing almost nothing, and that people that their light shone out from them, and people were inspired by this and sort of wanted to do the right thing. So I guess that's the starting point, is that for example, in this is the Analects of Confucius. I have a great translation here. It's got some good intro material too, but it's an old one. I don't know if you can still find it for sale. But so in book 2, saying number 11, it says, "The master said, he who, by reanimating the old, can gain knowledge of the new, is fit to be a teacher." And that is what I'm trying to do. I don't know that I always succeed in it, but that is kind of what we're trying to do on the Godward podcast. So we look back and we try to say, like, is something written 2,500 years ago potentially very relevant in our day? So just to give you a sense of this, he talks about the way, which is also called the Tao sometimes, right? Although it's not the technical Tao from Taoism, I guess, but it just means like the way, the way you do things. Just to give you a sense of like what he calls filial piety, which is that responsibility to honor your parents. The master said, "While a man's father is alive, you can only see his intentions. It is when his father dies that you discover whether or not he is capable of carrying them out. If, for the whole 3 years of mourning, he manages to carry on the household exactly as in his father's day, then he is a good son indeed." So you see here that there's this sense of like tradition, shepherd, or what was the word they used for that in church when I was growing up? Like stewardship, right? Like be the steward of tradition. In other words, there's a kind of honor in just doing it the way that your father taught you to do it, not to always be looking to make progress or something. Similarly with the reference to the way of the former kings. Master Yu said, there were a couple of, he had his disciples, Confucius had, and these other masters that were sometimes recorded in this book. Master Yu said, "In the usages of ritual, it is harmony that is prized. The way of the former kings from this got its beauty. Both small matters and great depend upon it. If things go amiss, he who knows the harmony will be able to attune them. But if harmony itself is not modulated by ritual, things will still go amiss." So, I would say one of the chief benefits of this book is that over and over again we are told of the master. And the master is Confucius, but the master is also like an archetype of a certain kind of gentleman. The word for it was Jen, Jen, in the translation that I have here. And it means, well, I think the suggestion here is that it's almost maybe even from the same root word, which would be astonishing. But like basically it has to do with goodness, and we might think of it as like the Aristotelian version of an aristocrat. So like a true gentleman, right? Like embodies Jen. So we get things like this. The master said, "Ning Wu Tzu, so long as the way prevailed in his country, showed wisdom. But when the way no longer prevailed, he showed his folly. To such wisdom as his we may all attain, but not to such folly." And that is an interesting idea, isn't it? And this is a reflection of another idea that shows up from time to time. I've seen it summarized different ways. I think he must say this elsewhere. I didn't see it today on my skim through. But famously attributed to Confucius is the idea that when the way prevails in the world, then be seen. When it does not, then hide. Isn't that interesting? And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, is the way what's guiding the world right now? Okay? And so you have this guy, he talks about Ning Wu Tzu, who it says, so long as the way prevailed in his country, he showed wisdom. But when the way no longer prevailed, he showed his folly. And it suggests that like he almost flips a switch when he realizes that the country is now led by clowns, or if clown world has descended and that is the absence of the way, then all of a sudden he falls into folly, because what's the point? You can't be virtuous in a world that doesn't honor virtue. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you get the kind of, maybe it's like a holy fool sort of a figure. In book 5, number 6 says, "The master said, the way makes no progress. I shall get upon a raft and float out to sea. I am sure you," that is, why you, right? One of the guys, "you would come with me. Su Lu, on hearing of this, was in high spirits. The master said, "That is you indeed. He sets far too much store by feats of physical daring. It seems as though I should never get a hold of the right sort of people." And so this is like one of the things that Confucius continues to do, is he's filling out this picture of like what a master ought to be. And so he gives you these really short examples of like somebody who in this case sets too high a store on feats of physical daring or something, right? And so as you read these, you're accumulating in your mind and kind of compiling in your mind the image of a master. The master does this, the master doesn't do that, right? Rotten wood cannot be carved, nor a wall of dried dung be troweled. So we're getting this idea that like, you have to get it right before you're ready to learn. The master said, "A gentleman takes as much trouble to discover what is right as lesser men take to discover what will pay." Isn't that interesting? The master said, "When natural substance prevails over ornamentation, you get the boorishness of the rustic. When ornamentation prevails over natural substance, you get the pedantry of the scribe. Only when ornament and substance are duly blended do you get the true gentleman." Here's another version of it. The master said to Yan Hui, I think that was his favorite disciple, the maxim, "When wanted, then go. When set aside, then hide." So anyway, this is just to give you a sense of this. I mean, I really strongly recommend reading this. I love this book. It's full of really interesting sayings, and as I say, the main virtue of it is that it gives you, like, cumulatively, and not like, and I was going to say slowly, but not too slowly. It's not that long of a book. A picture of kind of like what you should be. Okay, and so that's my setup for what I was going to talk about more generally. Now, the other thing that Confucius talks about, and I'm looking for it here. I didn't even get to it this time because, let me see. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so should I read this whole section or not? It's a little bit long. Yeah, let's just read it. I'm going to read it real quick and then I'll say a few words. The concept is called, and you can Google this, there's a Wikipedia page about it, the rectification of names. So to rectify something means to like set it right, okay, make it right again. And names here, we almost should, it's an old-fashioned way of saying, I mean, that's what you're going to Google, the rectification of names. But what it means is more like the rectification of labels or of terminology or something like that. So really what we're requesting here is that we start calling things what they are again. And so I brought up the point of, the 4th Capitol Hill policeman suicide yesterday because it's like, man, I'm getting to a point where, like, okay, I'm not a conspiracy theorist here, but, like, I'm basically, like, plagiarizing Tim Dillon's tweet here yesterday where he said something like, does anyone else find it odd that, 4 cops, and like, in all of their families, the statements are like, it's so perplexing. He seemed to love life. We couldn't see this coming, And I mean, look, I'm not saying anything, but I don't know, you guys. Did Building 7 just fall by itself? You know what I'm saying? So, all right, here we go. This is called the rectification of names. Su Lu said, "If the Prince of Wei were waiting for you to come and administer his country for him, what would be your first measure?" So, like, what would be your first reform? The master said, "It would certainly be to correct language." Su Lu said, "Can I have heard you aright? Surely what you say has nothing to do with the matter. Why should language be corrected?" The master said, "You! How boorish you are! A gentleman, when things he does not understand are mentioned, should maintain an attitude of reserve. If language is incorrect, then what is said does not concord with what is meant. What is to be done cannot be effected. If what is to be done cannot be effected, then rites and music will not flourish. If rites and music do not flourish, then mutilations and lesser punishments will go astray. And if mutilations and lesser punishments go astray, then the people have nowhere to put hand or foot. Therefore, the gentleman uses only such language as is proper for speech, and only speaks of what it would be proper to carry into effect. The gentleman, in what he says, leaves nothing to mere chance. So I think that's the primary statement of this. And so this becomes a whole idea. There's like a whole, secondary or like critical language on the concept of the rectification of names. And the idea was, look, they're saying 2 + 2 is 5 out there. They're saying that, as I said in my last episode, the oceans are rising and we're all about to be flooded. Or they're saying men can become women. Or like, all these kinds of, you need to get vaccinated, but then you're still not immune to the disease. You just have a lesser viral load or something. And it's like, but you still have to do it or else you're a hateful person. It's like, whoa, this seems like a lot of corruption in our language. Let's just get back to very basic descriptions of reality, right? There's a virus out there, apparently. There's a vaccine that maybe lessens your chance of making the illness very severe, but you can still communicate the disease. If you're under the age of 50 and not fat and don't have 2.6, coexisting conditions or whatever, then you'll probably survive it and generally be fine. There is supposedly something called long COVID that affects people. It's an autoimmune disorder, whatever. We can talk in realistic terms, but when you turn on the news, what you see is none of that. You see this kind of like constant warping of reality by the like aggressive deployment of, not very subtly gaslighting terminology and language. And so it appears to me that the way is lost in the world now. And you could argue that the way is lost because the language has been so corrupted. And so if we were to reform the world, we would have to begin by setting the language straight again. And what would that mean? It would mean calling things by their real names. This is that, right? 2 + 2 is 4. That's a man, baby, So anyway, this is my short episode on Confucius. I may return someday, but it's hard to do the long episode on Confucius because it is just sayings. There isn't really a narrative in the Analects. But since I've got you and you're here and looking to listen to something, I'll just read a couple more of these, I guess, almost at random. Duke Ching of Qi asked Master Kung about government. Master Kung replied, saying, "Let the prince be a prince, the minister a minister, the father a father, and the son a son." The Duke said, "How true! For indeed, when the prince is not a prince, the minister not a minister, the father not a father, the son not a son, one may have a dish of millet in front of one, and yet not know if one will live to eat it." For some reason, that makes me think of Kamala Harris. Like, is that really the vice president? Is that the best we could do? Let's see. Is there anything else I've got highlighted here? The master said, "When the way prevails in the land, be bold in speech and bold in action. When the way does not prevail, be bold in action, but conciliatory in speech." Ooh. You got to think about that one, but that's a good one. That's a good one. So, here's another version of that. The master said, "Do not be too ready to speak of it, lest the doing of it should prove to be beyond your powers." Again, the master said, "A gentleman is ashamed to let his words outrun his deeds." That's interesting. The master, oh, this one's for me. Here's me confessing, because sometimes I'm like, why am I not as famous as Jordan Peterson yet? I mean, look at this channel. It's amazing, all the work. Why do I not at least get a job? You know what I mean? But that's me griping. But the interesting thing is, he says, the master said, a gentleman does not grieve that people do not recognize his merits. He grieves at his own incapacities. Or another version of that is, he worries that he doesn't see the merits of others, you know? And I like both of those. And I feel like, yeah, sometimes I'm guilty of that. I mean, but part of it is, too, that like he's saying, the reason he says that is that if the world does lose the way and unvirtuousness reigns, and you're concerned for recognition, then you're gonna become perverse. You're gonna become unvirtuous to get the positive feedback from the unvirtuous elite who rule over you, something like that. The master said, the horse Qi was not famed for its strength, but for its inner qualities. The master said, the truth is, no one knows me. Tzu Kung said, what is the reason that you are not known? The master said, I do not accuse heaven, nor do I lay the blame on men. But the studies of men here below are felt on high, and perhaps after all I am known, not here, but in heaven. Okay, I'll finish with this one, because it's, again, we think about we might talk about like the virtues of the hero in the Western tradition, or the attributes of a gentleman in the West. So something like that is what's discussed here. But it's in the like very Platonic sense, like, you know, a true aristocrat. Tzu Lu asked about the qualities of a true gentleman. The master said, he cultivates in himself the capacity to be diligent in his tasks. Tzu Lu said, can he not go further than that? The master said, he cultivates in himself the capacity to ease the lot of other people. Tzu Lu said, can he not go further than that? The master said, he cultivates in himself the capacity to ease the lot of the whole populace. If he can do that, could even Yao or Shun find cause to criticize him? The master said, with those who follow a different way, it is useless to take counsel. The master said, women and people of low birth are very hard to deal with. If you are friendly with them, they get out of hand, and if you keep your distance, they resent it. Su Hsia said, a gentleman has three varying aspects. Seen from far, he looks severe. When approached, he is found to be mild. When heard speaking, he turns out to be incisive. Su Yu said, my friend Chang does the things that it is hard to be able to do, but he is not yet good. In the way of the gentleman there can be no bluff. It is only the divine sage who embraces in himself both the first step and the last.